The golden light of the afternoon began to thin, losing its sharp intensity as that stretched across the canopy. High above, the sun dipped, pulling the warmth from the air and leaving behind a cooling, amber glow. Long, spindly shadows of the oak trees reached out, crawling across the forest floor like reaching fingers. They darkened the patches of moss and traced the jagged edges of roots, turning the clearing into a mosaic of shifting grays. The wind slowed, its rustle dropping to a low, rhythmic hum that barely stirred the leaves. Every movement in the forest seemed to pause, caught in the transition between the heat of the day and the chill of dusk. The birds ceased their calls, leaving the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and cooling cedar. The transition was absolute, a slow, inevitable turning of the world toward the dark. Inside the hollow of the three oaks, the den transformed into a workspace. Ash ignored the ambient sounds of the forest, his attention locked entirely on the floor. He had gathered a collection of fallen foliage, each piece chosen for its specific shape and color. He nudged a vibrant maple leaf, a fraction of an inch to the left, his nose twitching as he measured the distance against a dried oak leaf. He pulled it back, adjusted the angle, and tapped it down with a single, precise claw. The maple leaf did not sit right. He pushed it again, rotating it until the serrated edges aligned perfectly with the curve of the oak leaf. He paused, head tilted, checking the symmetry. He nudged a third leaf, a brittle birch, into the gap between them, sliding it forward until it rested flush against the others. His movements were slow, deliberate, and entirely absorbed. He did not look up. He did not shift his weight. He only focused on the tension between the leaves. Every adjustment was a calculation of weight and balance. He smoothed the surface one final time, confirming the alignment was exact. The display was finished. Ember sat only a few paces away, her posture rigid. She watched the space between the roots, her gaze fixed on the erratic movements of her sister. Bree had found a crayfish near the entrance and was now attempting to balance the creature on the bridge of her nose. The crayfish scrambled, its pincers waving in the air, causing Bree to squint and shake her head. Every time the crayfish slipped, Bree would pounce on it, batting it back up with a clumsy swipe of her paw. Ember watched the display, her tail beginning to twitch in a sharp, rhythmic arc against the dirt. She shifted her weight, her ears flattening slightly. She let out a soft, huffing breath through her nose, her eyes tracking the crayfish as it tumbled across the floor once more. Bree ignored the tension, rolling onto her back to toss the crayfish into the air, only to scramble after it with a series of chirps. Ember's tail struck the ground with a dull, audible thud. She stood up, took a half step toward the pair, then stopped, her muscles coiled. The air inside the hollow of the three oaks held the weight of the day. It was thick, layered with the sharp, clean bite of cedar shavings scattered near the sleeping area. Beneath that, the heavy, musk-like scent of damp earth rose from the floor, cooling as the sun dipped lower outside. Mama Flora moved through the space, her nose working constantly, filtering the air. She passed a pile of gathered berries, and the sweet, fermented tang of the fruit cut through the cedar, filling the center of the den. The scent was pervasive, clinging to the walls and the soft moss bedding. Bree paused in her game, her nostrils flaring as she caught the scent of the cedar. Then, the deeper, richer smell of the forest floor. She took a long, deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly. The air was heavy, almost liquid, carrying the history of their day in every molecule. It smelled of the damp woods, the crushed stems of the berries, and the dry, splintered wood of the oak roots. Every movement within the den stirred these scents, swirling them together into a singular, comforting atmosphere. It was the smell of safety, of a day's labor finished, and of the earth itself closing in to protect them. Papa Finn shifted his weight, his large paws pressing deep into the soft earth of the den floor. He circled the central area once, his movements heavy and deliberate, before lowering his frame. He tucked his nose against his flank, his breathing slowing until it matched the rhythmic pulse of the forest outside. Yet, his rest was not absolute. His ears, large and sensitive, remained alert. They swiveled independently, rotating like radar dishes to catch the faint, distant rustle of wind through the oak leaves. A twig snapped somewhere far beyond the den entrance. Instantly, the base of his left ear twitched, a sharp, involuntary jerk. He did not wake, but his muscles remained coiled, ready to react to the slightest shift in the environment. He remained a silent sentry. His body surrendered to the fatigue of the day, while his senses stayed locked on the perimeter. Mama Flora rose from the shadows at the back of the den. Her movements were fluid, silent, and entirely purposeful. As she navigated the space between the sleeping kits and the entrance, she did not look back, but her presence shifted the energy of the room instantly. She reached the pile of the day's harvest, her paws moving with a practiced, rhythmic grace. She began to clear the space, nudging aside loose debris to expose the mound of food gathered during the long afternoon. Her amber eyes scanned the group, her gaze lingering on the kits, before she turned her full attention to the task at hand. She pushed a pile of soft, dried moss toward the center of the sleeping area, a clear, silent command that the time for play had reached its end. Her efficiency was absolute. Every motion was calculated to minimize effort while maximizing order. She worked with a steady, quiet intensity, her nose twitching, as she assessed the quality of the haul. The siblings watched her, their own movements slowing as they mirrored her focus. Mama Flora leaned over the pile, her nose working with surgical precision. She hooked a claw beneath a cluster of elderberries, pulling them gently away from the damp, heavy weight of the crayfish. The berries rolled across the earthen floor, small and dark, settling into a neat, rounded mound. She repeated the motion, her paws moving in a blur of efficiency that spoke of years of practice. One crayfish, tangled in a stray vine, resisted her touch. She paused, tilted her head, and used her teeth to nip the vine away, freeing the catch with a single clean snap. She nudged the crayfish into a separate pile, her movements devoid of wasted energy. Each item was categorized, organized, and placed according to its type. She checked the piles again, her amber eyes darting across the sorted harvest, to ensure no stray debris remained. The scent of cedar and damp earth intensified as she exposed the fresh harvest beneath the surface. With a final, deliberate push, she aligned the last berry, completing the task. The harvest was perfectly divided, a testament to her skills. The sorting was complete. Mama Flora stood motionless for a heartbeat, her amber eyes scanning the dim interior of the hollow. The air held the heavy, grounding scent of cedar and damp earth, a familiar comfort that signaled the transition toward rest. She looked toward the center of the den, where the kits had been playing, and then back to the pile of moss she had gathered earlier. With a deliberate, slow-motion movement, she extended a paw. She pressed her weight into the soft, fibrous mound and nudged it firmly across the packed dirt floor. The moss slid in a smooth arc, coming to rest in the exact center of the sleeping area. It was a silent, unmistakable gesture. The work was done. The labor of the long afternoon had officially concluded. She held her position, her gaze fixed on the kits to ensure the message was received. The den grew noticeably quieter, the ambient energy shifting from the frantic pace of gathering to the stillness of the coming night. Every detail within the hollow was now aligned with the rhythm of the evening, and with the signal delivered, the family began to move in unison toward the center of the den. The moss sat in the center, a soft invitation that did not go unnoticed. Ember watched the movement, her ears swiveling forward to catch the subtle shift in the den's atmosphere. She stood up, her muscles stretching as she rose to her full height. With a sharp, vigorous motion, she shook her body from head to tail. Dust particles danced in the dim light as they fell away, settling onto the earthen floor. She took a breath, the scent of cedar and damp earth filling her lungs, and turned her focus toward her mother. There was no hesitation in her stride. She trotted across the short distance, her paws landing softly on the packed dirt. She reached Mama Flora and stopped, waiting for the next movement. She nudged her mother's shoulder with her nose, a gesture of alignment and shared purpose. Together, they stood over the moss, preparing to shape the foundation of their rest. Ember looked at the pile, then back at her mother, ready to follow the lead. She lowered her head, sniffing the moss to gauge its density, and began to push with her forepaws. Her movements were purposeful, mirroring the efficiency she had observed all day. She was no longer just watching. She was contributing to the rhythm of the family. The transition from play to labor was complete, and she stood ready to work until the nest was perfect. The work began without a single sound. Mama Flora moved to the left side of the moss pile, her paws working in steady, rhythmic sweeps to gather the edges inward. Ember mirrored her from the right, her movements synchronized with her mother's pace. They pushed the moss together, creating a consistent pressure that shaped the mound. There was no need for communication. Every shift in weight and every adjustment of their paws was a response to the other. They moved in a tight, fluid circle, their sides occasionally brushing as they navigated the small space. When Mama Flora paused to tuck a stray bit of moss into the center, Ember immediately filled the gap, smoothing the surface with her nose. The rhythm was hypnotic. They worked as one entity, their breathing falling into a shared cadence that echoed against the earthen walls. Every movement was efficient, focused entirely on the task. They circled the nest again, refining the shape until the moss was perfectly distributed. The bond between them tightened with every pass, a wordless conversation spoken through the physical act of creation. The final stage of the nest required more than just sweeping. It needed weight. Mama Flora stepped into the center of the moss, her paws kneading the material down to create a firm, depressed basin. Ember followed, stepping into the circle to reinforce the walls. They moved in a slow, deliberate rotation, pressing their bodies against the inner perimeter to bank the moss high. The material yielded under their pressure, shifting from a loose pile into a structured bowl-like shape. Every rotation deepened the center, carving out a space that would cradle them through the night. They pushed outward with their hind legs, firming the edges so the nest would hold its form. The scent of the moss intensified as it was compressed, a rich, earthy aroma that signaled the completion of their task. They paused, checking the symmetry of the circle, and made minor adjustments with their noses to ensure the floor was level. Ash stepped forward as the others retreated, his focus entirely on the edge of the newly formed nest. He carried his collection of river-polished stones, each one smoothed by years of current and grit. He dropped the first stone near the northern curve, watching it settle into the moss. It was slightly off-center, so he nudged it with his nose, sliding it a fraction of an inch until it sat flush against the wall. He moved along the perimeter, placing the stones one by one. Each piece was a distinct weight, cold and hard against the yielding texture of the bedding. He worked with a deliberate, slow pace, ensuring the stones formed a consistent, unbroken line. When he reached the eastern edge, he found a small gap where the moss had slumped. He selected a larger, flatter stone from his pile, wedging it firmly into the space to provide structural support. The stones created a clear, defined boundary. He nudged a final pebble into place, completing the ring. Ash stepped back, his task finished, and observed the clean, circular geometry. Bree remained in the center of the den, the crayfish balanced precariously on her nose. She twitched her whiskers, trying to maintain focus, but her eyelids were heavy. The crayfish shifted, its claws clicking against her fur, and she let out a sharp, playful chuff. She tilted her head, trying to reset the balance, but the small creature scrambled free and scuttled toward the shadows of the wall. Bree lunged for it, her paws skidding on the packed earth, but she stopped halfway through the motion. The momentum died as quickly as it had begun. She sat back on her haunches, watching the crayfish disappear into a crevice, and let out a long, audible sigh. The playfulness drained from her posture, replaced by a sudden, heavy stillness. She looked toward the center of the den, where the mossy nest waited. She shook her head, ears flopping with the movement, and turned her back on the game. With a slow, deliberate trot, she began to navigate to the nest. She reached the edge of the border, hesitated for a heartbeat, and then stepped over the stones into the soft, waiting hollow of the family bed. Bree sank into the moss, the soft fibers yielding under her weight. She circled once, then twice, pressing her paws into the bedding to find the perfect contour. A brief shiver ran through her frame as she tucked her nose beneath her tail, but she shifted again, restless. She stretched her front legs out, then pulled them back in, her eyes fluttering shut and then snapping open as she adjusted her chin against the mossy rim. The transition from the day's frantic energy to this moment of stillness was absolute. Her breathing, once rapid and shallow from her play, began to deepen, slowing into a steady, rhythmic pulse. Her muscles, which had been coiled for movement only moments ago, went slack. She let out a final, soft huff, a sound that barely vibrated in the quiet of the den. The tension left her legs, and her paws curled inward. Her eyelids grew heavy, the last of her awareness slipping away as the warmth of the nest enveloped her. She did not stir again. Within seconds, the frantic energy that had defined her afternoon was gone, replaced by the heavy, motionless peace of deep sleep. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, synchronized cadence, and she remained perfectly still, anchored in the center of the nest, completely surrendered to the exhaustion that had finally caught up with her. Ember remained standing near the edge of the nest, her gaze sweeping over the sleeping forms of her family. The den was silent, save for the deep, rhythmic breathing of the others. She felt the weight of the day pressing down, but a restless curiosity pulled her toward the entrance. She stepped away from the warmth of the moss, her paws making no sound on the earthen floor as she moved toward the opening. The air changed as she drew closer to the threshold. It grew thinner, sharper, and carried the scent of cooling pine needles and damp soil. She reached the mouth of the den and stopped. Outside, the forest was no longer the vibrant, sun-drenched space of the afternoon. The light was retreating, pulling back into the deep thickets and leaving behind a world of muted grays and encroaching shadows. Ember pressed her whiskers forward, testing the currents of the evening air. It felt different, charged with the subtle, unseen movements of the nocturnal world. She stood perfectly still, her ears swiveling to catch the faint, distant rustle of leaves. The boundary between the safety of the hollow and the vast, darkened expanse of the woods felt thin, almost fragile. She lingered there, watching the twilight creep across the forest floor. The forest outside the den underwent a sudden, silent transformation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the remaining light bled into a deep, saturated lavender. This color spilled across the entrance, washing over the gnarled roots and the packed earth in a way that made the familiar world seem alien. The light was not static, it pulsed, shifting from pale violet to a bruised, heavy purple that clung to the edges of the trees. It painted the entrance in fleeting, ghostly strokes, highlighting the jagged edges of the bark and the fine, silvered moss clinging to the stones. This was a brief, haunting window of time where the forest lost its daytime clarity. The lavender glow cast long, distorted shapes that danced against the den walls, creating a visual rhythm that felt both beautiful and profoundly lonely. It was a dying light, one that promised no return until the cycle completed its long, dark turn. Ember watched as the vibrancy of the hue began to thin, turning into a translucent gray. The beauty of the moment lay in its instability. The faster they dissolved into the encroaching gloom. The entrance, once a gateway to the golden afternoon, now stood as a silent, darkened frame. The lavender glow vanished, leaving the threshold in a sudden, stark darkness. Ember did not move. She felt the atmosphere shift instantly. A sharp, biting current of air swept through the entrance, bypassing the shelter of the oaks to brush directly against her whiskers. It was not the gentle breeze of the afternoon. It was cold, thin, and carried the raw, unfiltered scent of the deep woods. The air felt heavy with the presence of things that moved without sound. Every hair on her muzzle reacted to the sudden drop in temperature, twitching as the cold air traced the sensitive lines of her face. This was the physical reminder of the wild world beyond the den, a space where the rules of the day no longer applied. She could feel the vibration of the forest floor changing, a subtle shift in the earth that suggested movement further out in the dark. The cold air was a warning, a tangible barrier that separated the warmth of her family from the unpredictable expanse of the night. She stood braced against the draft, her muscles coiled. The snap of a dry twig echoed from the darkness, sharp and deliberate. It was close enough to vibrate through the ground beneath her paws. Ember did not wait to identify the source. The curiosity that had held her at the threshold evaporated, replaced by a singular, urgent need for the safety of the hollow. She pulled her head back from the entrance, her ears flattening against her skull as she pivoted. The transition from the biting, open cold of the night to the stagnant, familiar warmth of the den was instantaneous. She pushed past the heavy roots that formed the doorway, her claws digging into the packed earth to gain traction. Inside, the scent of damp soil and cedar was thick, a stark contrast to the thin, sharp air of the forest. She moved quickly, her paws making no sound on the floor as she navigated the shadows of the sleeping area. She did not look back at the entrance. She focused entirely on the soft, rhythmic breathing of the others huddled in the center of the nest. The darkness of the den was not a void, but a barrier. She tucked her nose into the curve of her own body, feeling the radiating heat of the family unit. The outside world, with its snapping twigs and predatory stillness, was now firmly locked away. She pressed her weight against the mass of her kin, letting the tension drain from her muscles as she surrendered to the quiet, protected space. The interior of the den settled into a heavy, rhythmic stillness. Ember pressed her weight into the pile, her breathing slowing to match the cadence of the others. In the corner, Papa Finn remained motionless, but his internal state shifted. He felt the subtle displacement of air as the family hunkered down, and he registered the exact location of each member by the heat radiating from their bodies. He did not move his head, yet his awareness expanded to cover the entire hollow. He listened to the wind outside, filtering the rustle of leaves from the soft, rhythmic inhale and exhale of his kin. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he opened one eye. The amber iris caught the dim light filtering through the entrance. Narrowing as he scanned the sleeping forms of Bree and Ash, he checked the seal of the den, his ears swiveling to catch any vibration. That did not belong to the forest's natural cycle. Every muscle in his frame remained coiled, ready to translate thought into immediate action. Yo, in the shetty of the space, his gaze fixed on the threshold, monitoring the boundary between the safety of the nest and the vast, dark expanse of the woods beyond. The stillness in the den grew heavy, but Finn was ready to break it. He shifted his weight, testing the packed earth beneath his paws, to ensure no loose debris would betray his movement. Satisfied, he began to rise. He pushed his front legs forward, extending his spine until it arched toward the low ceiling of the hollow. He kept his claws retracted, pressing his pads firmly into the floor to maintain silence. As he reached the peak of the extension, his shoulder joints popped, a dry, sharp sound that cut through the quiet like a snapped twig. He did not flinch. He continued the motion, drawing his hind legs back and stretching his muscles to their full capacity. His tail extended, rigid and straight, acting as a counterweight to his reach. Every tendon in his frame pulled taut, a display of raw, functional power. He held the stretch for a long second, his head lowered, eyes narrowed as he scanned the entrance once more. The tension in his limbs was gone, replaced by a fluid, coiled readiness. He stood fully upright now, his height filling the space, his breath steady and deep. He was no longer resting. He was fully engaged, his body primed for any sudden shift in the environment. Finn did not hesitate. He took his first step, moving with a deliberate, rhythmic gait around the perimeter of the nest. His paws landed softly, pressing into the earth to create a clear, unbroken line in the dust. He kept his head low, tracking the scent of the ground as he moved, ensuring no foreign trace had breached the inner circle. Halfway through the first rotation, he stopped. He lifted his nose, drawing in a long, sharp breath to sample the air currents flowing from the entrance. The scent of pine and cold stone confirmed the perimeter was clear. He exhaled, a low vibration in his chest, and resumed his path. He tightened his arc for the second circle, his movements becoming more fluid, more precise. He stepped precisely where he had stepped before, reinforcing the boundary with every placement of his weight. He was mapping the space, claiming it, and sealing it off from the vast, unpredictable woods outside. As he completed the final turn, he positioned himself at the very edge of the sleeping area, facing the dark tunnel. He stood motionless, his body a solid, unyielding barrier. Finn lowered his frame, shifting his weight until his chest pressed against the packed earth at the den entrance. He tucked his limbs beneath him, creating a solid, immovable mass that spanned the width of the opening. He adjusted his position once, nudging his shoulder against the wall of the hollow to ensure he was flush with the tunnel's edge. No draft could pass him. No movement could go unnoticed. He anchored his claws into the floor, bracing himself. His head remained high, eyes fixed on the shifting shadows of the forest floor outside. He became a living wall. Behind him, the rhythm of the den changed. The restless shifting of the others ceased. The air grew heavy. Finn did not blink. He monitored the wind, the rustle of dry leaves, and the distant snap of twigs. He was the threshold. He was the barrier. He held his position with a focus that left no room for doubt. The vigil at the entrance continued until a soft rustle sounded from the shadows behind. Flora moved from the center of the nest, her paws making no sound on the packed earth. She approached the threshold where Finn remained braced. She did not stop at a distance. She stepped forward, closing the gap between them until her side met his flank. She leaned her weight into him, a steady, deliberate pressure that pushed against his own. The heat from her body transferred instantly, radiating through his fur and settling into his muscles. It was a silent acknowledgement of the watch they kept together. Finn felt the shift in his own posture as he accepted her weight, his muscles relaxing just enough to accommodate her presence without breaking his defensive stance. They stood as one, a double-layered barrier against the encroaching night. She pressed closer, her breathing syncing with his, creating a rhythm that filled the narrow space of the tunnel. The contact solidified their partnership, ensuring the safety of the hollow remained absolute. Finn felt the weight of the night pressing against the entrance, but he held his ground. He drew a long, slow breath, expanding his chest until his ribs brushed against Flora. He began to exhale, not in a rush, but in a controlled, steady stream of air that bypassed his throat and resonated deep within his chest. A low, guttural vibration started at his core. It was not a sound meant for the ears, but a force meant for the earth. He pressed his paws harder into the packed soil, driving the tremor downward. The floor beneath them began to hum. The vibration traveled outward, a ripple of kinetic energy that moved through the dirt and into the sleeping area where the others lay. He felt the ground pulse in rhythm with his own body. It was a physical anchor, a tether that bound the entire family to the center of the hollow. The vibration deepened, turning the floor into a living, breathing thing. Ash and Bree shifted in their sleep, their breathing slowing to match the cadence of the rumble. The tension in the den dissolved, replaced by a heavy, rhythmic stability. Finn sustained the sound, a constant, low-frequency hum that acted as a shield. Beyond the threshold of the Three Oaks, the forest underwent a transformation. The last traces of twilight vanished, leaving the woods to the creatures of the dark. A sharp, sudden snap of a twig echoed from the distance, followed by the soft, rhythmic rustle of leaves as something moved through the underbrush. The forest was no longer a place of light and activity. It had become a vast, breathing expanse of shadows. A cool breeze swept across the entrance, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp moss, but it did not penetrate the hollow. The silence outside was not empty. It was filled with the subtle, clicking sounds of insects and the distant, mournful call of a nightbird. Each sound marked the beginning of a new cycle, a shift in the hierarchy of the woods that left the den untouched. The isolation was absolute. The forest grew quiet, its nocturnal inhabitants moving with purpose through the dark. Yet the hollow remained a world apart. The world outside had surrendered to the night, but the den remained a silent, protected island in the dark expanse of the Whisperwood. Inside the hollow, the air was still, held in place by the weight of the night. The only movement was the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of chests. Ash, Bree, Ember, and the parents lay in a tight circle, their bodies pressed together in the dark. A subtle shift occurred as the minutes passed. The individual breaths began to merge. One exhale overlapped with another, creating a seamless, continuous flow of air. It was a soft, steady sound, rhythmic as a tide, rising and falling in the confined space. This was not merely the sound of rest. It was a collective pulse, the breathing synchronized, falling into a cadence that echoed the slow, deep beat of a single heart. Each inhalation drew the warmth of the others closer, while each exhalation released the tension of the day. The sound filled the corners of the den, a soft, persistent murmur that drowned out the distant rustle of the forest. It was a language of safety, spoken without effort or intent. The rhythm deepened, becoming the primary sensation in the hollow. It was a heartbeat made of air, a shared vibration that connected every member of the family in the dark. The den was no longer just a shelter, it was a living, breathing entity. Papa Finn felt the vibration of the collective breath beneath him, a low-frequency hum that traveled through the packed earth. He let out a final, rumbling sound, a deep resonance that seemed to lock the den into the very roots of the trees. It was a signal, a closing of the day's account. He shifted his weight one last time, feeling the warmth of his family pressed against his side. The need to monitor the entrance, to track the wind, and to listen for the snap of a branch began to dissolve. He looked at the small forms curled into the nest, the rise and fall of their bodies now a constant, reliable anchor. The tension in his shoulders ebbed away, replaced by the heavy, welcome pull of exhaustion. He did not fight the sensation. Instead, he leaned into the silence, letting the rhythm of the den become his own. His eyelids grew heavy, the weight of the day settling into his bones. He took one final, slow breath, feeling the air move through the hollow. Then, he closed his eyes. He surrendered to the quiet. Outside the hollow, the Whisperwood forest deepened its hold on the night. The canopy overhead became a vast, impenetrable ceiling, shielding the den from the reach of the moon. Nocturnal sounds flickered at the edges of the woods, a distant scuttle, the soft rustle of leaves against bark, but none dared breach the perimeter of the three oaks. The den remained a pocket of stillness, cradled by the earth and the ancient roots that anchored it in place. Time seemed to suspend itself within the hollow, the darkness acting as a protective shroud for the family tucked away inside. Yet, even in the deepest point of the night, the world continued its slow, inevitable rotation. The air began to carry a subtle shift, a faint change in temperature that hinted at the distance of the horizon. Though the forest remained cloaked in shadows, the promise of the coming cycle was already woven into the stillness. The darkness was not a permanent state, but a pause. It held the potential of the morning, waiting for the first golden rays to crest the tree line and reclaim the forest floor. The den rested in this silent anticipation, a sanctuary waiting for the inevitable return of the light. Every breath taken in the dark was a step toward that moment, a quiet endurance that bridged the gap between the end of one day and the beginning of the next. The woods cradled them, the earth supported them, and the night held the promise of the dawn, ensuring that when the light finally broke, they would be ready to rise once more.